want you to study harder.
It started as a simple visit to drop off something at my friend's house. But the moment Margaret, 40 years old, American Caucasian, with long black hair cascading over her shoulders, opened the door, the air felt different. Heavier, warmer, somehow electric. Her dark brown eyes met mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten, and a small, knowing smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Her lightly tanned skin glowed in the afternoon sun, subtle freckles across her nose giving her a delicate, approachable quality, while soft laugh lines hinted at her warmth and life experience. Her curvy figure, graceful posture, and confident presence made it clear she carried herself with both poise and ease. "Hey," she said, voice soft but deliberate, the words seeming to linger in the air longer than necessary. As she handed me a glass of iced tea, our fingers brushed ever so lightly. The fleeting contact sent a quiet thrill up my arm, brief, but enough to make the moment feel suspended in time. The ordinary setting of the living room faded. All I could focus on was the subtle sway of her shoulders, the way her hair caught the light, the warmth of her presence in the small space between us. As we spoke, casual conversation quickly became layered with unspoken tension. She noticed the nervous twist of my hands, the slight hesitation in my voice, and responded with a smile that was teasing, knowing, and just intimate enough to make my heart race. Her movements were deliberate, yet effortless. The graceful arc of her hands as she adjusted the vase on the table, the tilt of her head when she laughed softly, the quiet sway of her hips as she leaned against the counter. Every detail was amplified in my awareness. The freckles on her nose, the subtle warmth of her lightly tanned skin, the dark glint in her eyes that hinted at curiosity and intent. Even small gestures carried meaning. When she tucked a loose strand of black hair behind her ear, I felt a quiet pull toward her presence. Her voice, warm and melodic, flowed over me with a comforting yet electrifying quality, each word measured, teasing, yet deliberate. I realized with a subtle shock how aware I was of her, of the space she occupied, the warmth she radiated, and the magnetic pull of her gaze. By the time I left, my pulse was still elevated. The brief touch of our fingers, the soft intensity in her eyes, the teasing curve of her smile, it all lingered in my mind. Something had shifted, quietly but unmistakably. That first encounter planted the seed of a connection that was playful yet charged, subtle yet impossible to ignore. The tension between us was delicate, like the first brush of sunlight on a spring morning, warm, teasing, and utterly irresistible. In that fleeting meeting, I realized the ordinary had become extraordinary. Margaret's presence had awakened a curiosity, a magnetic awareness that promised slow, deliberate discoveries, and I knew this was only the beginning of something far more compelling than a casual visit. The second encounter carried a different weight, a quiet tension, deeper than the playful curiosity of the first meeting. The afternoon sun filtered through the curtains of Margaret's living room, illuminating her 40-year-old American Caucasian features with a soft warmth. Her long black hair fell freely over her shoulders, catching the light in glossy waves. Dark brown eyes lifted toward mine, holding a steady, inviting gaze that seemed to measure not just my presence, but my attention to every subtle detail. Her lightly tanned skin glowed gently, freckles dusted across the bridge of her nose, soft laugh lines hinting at both warmth and experience. Her graceful posture and curvy silhouette radiated confidence, yet there was a quiet vulnerability in her expression, one that drew me in irresistibly. "Glad you came by again," she said softly, her voice carrying a playful edge that made my chest tighten. There was a rhythm to her words, a measured tease, as if she knew precisely the effect she had on me. The way she leaned slightly forward as she spoke, her hand brushing lightly against the table where ours crossed, made the air between us hum. Each fleeting touch lingered, deliberate enough to spark an awareness I couldn't ignore. We settled into the living room, the afternoon sunlight bathing the space in golden warmth. Her presence was magnetic, It wasn't just the way she moved, but how she carried herself. Every gesture, from the tilt of her head when she laughed softly to the subtle shift of her weight as she crossed her legs, seemed to communicate more than words ever could. My awareness of her had sharpened. I noticed the soft warmth of her skin when our hands accidentally brushed, the curve of her lips as she smiled at something trivial, the glint in her dark brown eyes that hinted at a quiet curiosity and intent. Conversation flowed with a casual ease, yet beneath it, every glance, every pause, every subtle gesture carried meaning. She leaned closer when speaking, just enough for me to feel the faint warmth radiating from her. A laugh escaped her softly, melodic and genuine, and it hung in the air long after, making the quiet room feel intimate. Each movement was deliberate, a careful dance of proximity and distance, teasing yet tender. When she reached for a book on the nearby shelf, our fingers brushed again. The contact lingered, a deliberate, almost electric moment that spoke volumes. I felt an undeniable pull, a magnetic awareness that went beyond mere curiosity. The playful teasing of the first visit had transformed into something richer, more nuanced, a subtle invitation to explore the boundaries of attention, care, and unspoken desire. By the time I left, the memory of her smile, the lingering warmth of her touch, and the quiet intensity of her gaze stayed with me. That second encounter had shifted the connection. Playful curiosity had evolved into a slow, deliberate dance of subtle intimacy, drawing us closer with each fleeting glance and gentle touch. The promise of more, of unspoken moments yet to unfold, hung in the sunlight that bathed the quiet living room. The third meeting carried a quiet, magnetic tension, one that seemed to deepen with every passing moment. It was late afternoon, and golden sunlight spilled across Margaret's living room, brushing against her 40-year-old American Caucasian features in a way that made every detail more vivid. Her long black hair framed her face gracefully, catching the light with subtle luster. Dark brown eyes met mine with an intensity that felt both comforting and provocative, and a soft, knowing smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Her lightly tanned skin glowed warmly, freckles dusted delicately across her nose, soft laugh lines giving her a sense of approachable wisdom. The gentle curve of her figure, carried with effortless poise, radiated confidence, yet the quiet vulnerability in her gaze invited closeness. "Stay a little longer," she said, voice smooth and deliberate, layered with teasing warmth. The invitation was subtle, almost casual, yet the weight behind it made my heart skip a beat. She leaned slightly forward on the sofa, her hand brushing mine lightly as she adjusted a cushion. That brief contact lingered, a small spark of awareness, a magnetic pull that made the ordinary act of conversation feel charged. We talked about trivial things at first, a shared memory from my friend's past, a favorite book she recommended, a joke that made both of us laugh softly. But in the spaces between words, the quiet tension grew. Her eyes tracked every subtle gesture I made, as if reading unspoken thoughts. The warmth of her presence filled the room, drawing me closer without words, without overt action. Every glance, every flicker of expression held meaning. A playful lift of her brow, a fleeting brush of her hair behind her ear, the soft curl of her lips as she laughed. At one point, she shifted closer, handing me a cup of tea. Our fingers met again, deliberately brushing this time, the lingering warmth of her touch leaving a trace of electric anticipation. I noticed the curve of her nails, the smooth texture of her skin, the subtle rhythm of her pulse against my fingers. Every small detail became amplified, the light in her dark brown eyes, the tilt of her head, the quiet assurance in her posture. The conversation gradually deepened, moving beyond casual topics. She shared a small anecdote from her past, revealing a layer of vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. I responded with honesty, sharing my own thoughts and hesitations. In that exchange, a new level of intimacy formed, one grounded in trust attention, and subtle awareness of the physical closeness between us. Her shoulder occasionally brushed mine. Her hand lingered momentarily near mine, and each fleeting contact carried the weight of something unspoken. By the time I left, the room seemed smaller, charged with a warmth that lingered long after stepping outside. Margaret's presence, her teasing glances, and the deliberate, quiet touches had built a bridge between us. Playful curiosity evolving into intentional intimacy. That day, I realized the connection was no longer casual. It had begun to settle into a slow, magnetic rhythm, one where silence and gesture spoke louder than words, and where anticipation pulsed in every glance, every touch, and every breath shared across the space between us. By the fourth encounter, the dynamic between us had shifted into something delicate, charged, and undeniably magnetic. The afternoon sun streamed through the open windows, bathing Margaret, 40-year-old American Caucasian with long black hair, in a warm glow that highlighted the gentle elegance of her features. Her dark brown eyes sparkled with a mix of curiosity and mischief, her lightly tanned skin glowing softly. Subtle freckles danced across the bridge of her nose, and the soft laugh lines framing her mouth hinted at warmth and life experience. Her graceful posture and the confident ease in her movements suggested authority and composure, yet the playful glimmer in her gaze betrayed a more intimate, teasing side. As soon as I arrived, the air between us hummed with unspoken energy. Margaret greeted me with a smile that felt both familiar and teasing, as if she held a secret just out of reach. Her fingers brushed mine lightly when she handed me a small notebook, and the brief contact lingered far longer than necessary, sending a subtle thrill through me. Every small gesture, from the tilt of her head to the casual sway of her shoulders, seemed carefully measured, drawing attention to the warmth of her presence and the magnetic energy in the space we shared. Conversation began casually, but the undertone of tension was unmistakable. Each word was layered with meaning, each pause pregnant with anticipation. She asked questions about my life, my thoughts, my ambitions, and while the topics seemed mundane on the surface, there was a deliberate intimacy in the way she leaned slightly closer, the way her dark brown eyes held mine a moment too long. The sunlight danced across her long black hair, and I found myself acutely aware of every detail. The curve of her lips when she smiled, the subtle movement of her hands, the warmth radiating from her lightly tanned skin when our arms brushed. Margaret's playful teasing reached new heights. She leaned forward, lowering her voice just enough to make it intimate, commenting on how innocent I looked, a word heavy with double meaning that made my pulse quicken. Her fingers grazed the edge of the table, brushing mine in an almost accidental, yet deliberate manner. The tension between us grew with every glance, every smile, every fleeting touch, building a slow, deliberate rhythm that neither of us could deny. Even as we laughed, shared stories, and exchanged small confidences, the room felt charged. Our proximity, our shared glances, and the magnetic warmth of her presence weaving together an unspoken, tantalizing connection. I noticed how she subtly mirrored my movements, how her posture shifted slightly toward mine, and how her dark eyes softened whenever our hands accidentally touched. Each moment felt suspended in time, a careful dance between restraint and desire. By the end of the visit, the playful tension had transformed into something far more palpable. My heart raced not just from attraction, but from the quiet awareness of how deeply we had begun to connect. Margaret's teasing smiles, lingering touches, and deliberate gestures had created a magnetic intimacy that was as exhilarating as it was forbidden. That afternoon, I realized the slow burn between us had grown stronger. Curiosity evolving into something tender, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. The fifth encounter felt different from the others, slower, more deliberate, and charged with a warmth that was impossible to ignore. The sun poured softly through the windows, illuminating Margaret, 40-year-old American Caucasian with long black hair, in golden light that accentuated her graceful posture and curvy figure. Her dark brown eyes held a quiet intensity, a mix of curiosity and subtle playfulness, while her lightly tanned skin glowed warmly. Freckles dusted the bridge of her nose, and soft laugh lines added a sense of maturity and approachability. She wore a fitted blouse and jeans, casual yet elegant, highlighting her effortless poise and the gentle sway of her movements. "Glad you stayed a little longer today," she said softly, her voice calm, yet carrying an unspoken weight that made my pulse quicken. The familiar warmth of her presence drew me closer as I stepped into the living room, and our fingers brushed again, brief, accidental, yet somehow lingering, as if testing the limits of our silent connection. That fleeting touch carried a tension that was both exhilarating and tender. We settled on the sofa, the sunlight warming the room and creating a cocoon-like intimacy. Conversation flowed naturally, touching on everyday topics, but beneath it was an undercurrent of attention and awareness. Every movement, every glance, every slight shift in posture seemed charged with meaning. When she laughed softly, it felt like a shared secret, a moment of connection that went beyond words. I noticed the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the warmth radiating from her lightly tanned skin and the subtle shimmer of her dark brown eyes when she looked directly at me. At one point, she reached over to adjust the blanket draped across the sofa, and our hands touched. This time, the contact lingered longer, deliberate yet tender. The warmth of her skin, the softness of her fingers, and the subtle rhythm of her pulse against mine made my awareness of her presence almost overwhelming. Her smile deepened as she met my gaze, her dark eyes filled with a quiet knowing, as if she understood the effect she had on me and reveled in it gently. The conversation grew more personal, drifting into reflections about life, choices, and small vulnerabilities. Her voice softened when she shared a memory from years past, and I responded with equal honesty. In that exchange, the quiet intimacy deepened, a connection built not on grand gestures, but on attentive presence, subtle touches, and the magnetic pull of proximity. When it was time to leave, the moment lingered. Margaret stood near the doorway, her posture relaxed but deliberate, fingers brushing briefly against mine again. The warmth of her presence stayed with me long after I stepped outside. That afternoon, the slow-burning tension between us had evolved into a deeper, more tangible connection, a quiet intimacy filled with playful glances, lingering touches, and the anticipation of what might come next. Every small interaction seemed to build toward something more, a subtle dance of awareness, attention, and unspoken desire that neither of us could deny. By the sixth meeting, the connection with Margaret, 40-year-old American Caucasian with long black hair, had grown from playful curiosity into a quiet, compelling emotional closeness. The late afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. Her dark brown eyes held a tender intensity, reflecting both amusement and a subtle vulnerability that made the air between us feel intimate and alive. Her lightly tanned skin glimmered in the sunlight, freckles across her nose catching the light, while soft laugh lines added warmth and authenticity to her expressions. She wore a casual yet elegant blouse with fitted trousers, the gentle sway of her posture accentuating her graceful, curvy figure and confident, mature presence. "Sit a little closer," she said, her voice low and inviting, with just the faintest hint of playfulness. The invitation wasn't forceful, but deliberate, and it drew me toward her without a word. As I moved slightly closer on the sofa, her hand lightly brushed my arm. A fleeting touch, yet it lingered, making my pulse spike with a warmth that was both thrilling and comforting. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head, the subtle movement of her fingers, the soft curl of her lips as she smiled, carried unspoken meaning, deepening the magnetic pull between us. Conversation flowed in a rhythm that felt natural, yet beneath the surface, it was layered with emotional intimacy. She asked about my thoughts, my small worries, my hopes, and I found myself responding with a level of honesty I rarely allowed myself. Margaret listened intently, her gaze steady and warm, her dark eyes reflecting empathy and quiet amusement at my hesitations. Occasionally, our hands brushed again, lingering just long enough to make the moment electric without breaking the calm intimacy of the room. She leaned slightly closer when telling a story from her past, her long black hair brushing lightly against my shoulder. The soft warmth of her presence, combined with the careful closeness of our bodies, made me acutely aware of every detail. The texture of her blouse against her skin, the subtle scent she carried, the slow rhythm of her breathing as she laughed softly. These small observations built an invisible bridge between us, connecting more than just physical proximity. Our thoughts, emotions, and attention began to intertwine. As the afternoon stretched on, the playful teasing of our early encounters softened into something more profound. Moments of silence were no longer empty. They were filled with unspoken understanding, lingering awareness, and the gentle rhythm of shared presence. Every glance, every subtle touch, and every word carried weight, building a bond that was tender, intentional, and deeply stirring. When it came time to leave, I felt the pull of that connection even more strongly. Margaret stood near the doorway, offering a soft smile that lingered in my mind long after I stepped into the sunlight outside. That day, the slow-burning tension between us had evolved into an emotional closeness, a magnetic intimacy that went beyond flirtation or playful curiosity. It was a quiet, tender awareness of each other, of presence, of touch, and of the subtle yet powerful bond forming in the spaces between words and gestures. The seventh and final encounter brought everything to a gentle, emotionally satisfying conclusion. The slow burn of connection, curiosity, and tension with Margaret, 40-year-old American Caucasian with long black hair, had evolved into a deep, comforting intimacy. The late afternoon sun poured through the living room windows, illuminating her gracefully poised figure, lightly tanned skin glowing warmly, and soft freckles across her nose sparkling in the light. Her dark brown eyes held a mixture of warmth, amusement, and tenderness, a mirror of the unspoken connection we had nurtured over the previous meetings. The subtle laugh lines around her mouth, the graceful curve of her posture, and the confident yet gentle way she moved reflected both maturity and a nurturing presence, creating an atmosphere that felt safe, intimate, and welcoming. "Stay with me a little longer today," she said softly, voice warm and deliberate, carrying a quiet sense of invitation that made my heart tighten with anticipation. The room felt smaller somehow, more intimate, as if the air itself were charged with the gentle hum of familiarity and unspoken understanding. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head, the soft brush of her fingers against mine as she handed me a cup of tea, the subtle leaning closer across the sofa, reinforced the quiet intimacy we had been cultivating. These moments were laden with significance, each touch and glance deepening the emotional bond we shared. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on past memories, shared reflections, and the small vulnerabilities we had gradually revealed to each other. Unlike before, there was no teasing tension or playful testing of boundaries. Now, our connection felt rooted in trust, attentiveness, and mutual care. Her presence was comforting, her laughter melodic and genuine, and the warmth radiating from her lightly tanned skin as our arms occasionally brushed conveyed a steady, reassuring closeness. Each glance held depth, each subtle touch spoke volumes, and the silent communication between us was more profound than any words could express. At one point, she reached out and lightly rested her hand on my forearm, just for a moment, a gesture filled with reassurance and calm intimacy. The touch was gentle but grounding, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey we had shared and the bond that had formed. I realized how much awareness I had of her presence, the soft glint in her dark brown eyes, the gentle sway of her long black hair as she moved, the graceful arch of her shoulders, and how each detail had become intertwined with my own emotions. As the visit came to an end, the warmth between us lingered. Margaret's soft smile, the steady confidence in her gaze, and the delicate tenderness in her gestures left a lasting impression. There was no urgency, no unfulfilled tension, only a profound sense of connection and satisfaction, a gentle resolution to the slow-building intimacy. The bond we had nurtured, grounded in shared attention, meaningful touch, and emotional honesty, had reached a fulfilling peak. Walking away, I felt a quiet serenity, knowing that the moments we shared had created a lasting imprint. The slow-burn journey of playful curiosity, tender teasing, emotional closeness, and subtle intimacy had arrived at a warm, human resolution. Margaret's presence, her laughter, her deliberate gestures, and the attentive, caring way she had engaged with me left a lingering sense of fulfillment. A gentle, satisfying conclusion to a connection that had been as deliberate as it was tender, as intimate as it was respectful. The story ended fully, with emotions resolved, hearts touched, and the subtle, lasting magic of a bond that felt both rare and profoundly human.